Classes in Lua are not a native resource as an object-oriented programming language like PHP and Java, which means you won't be able to create class structures or instances like you would in those languages. However, it's possible to mimic class behavior using tables and metatables, and Stormwind Library provides resources to handle class-like structures in World of Warcraft add-ons. In this video, you will learn how it's possible to write class structures in Lua, how to register classes in Stormwind Library to easily create instances, how to write, register, and extend abstract classes, and see examples of classes in action. The class you are seeing now is a Lua table that's formatted like a class to follow the library's standards. There are basically a couple of conventions that will ease the process of creating and extending classes in Lua for add-ons. The class structure is created as a local empty table, and that mimics the class declaration mostly because after that we use some indentation so the methods and properties look like they're nested inside the class, and in fact they are. The constructor looks like the ones in PHP, but carries this name to also match Lua's methods format. It's registered as a table function, as you can see, using the dot, which sounds like a static method and just returns a set metatable call. Stormwind Library requires that every registered class has a constructor, as it will call this method when creating an instance. After that, the next methods can be written as instance methods using columns. And finally, most important part, the library add class method must be called to register this structure. This method receives the class name, which can be anything you want, as long as it's unique, and the class table. Oh, and just an important note, as you can see here, I'm calling self column add class because this item class used in this example is already inside the library table. In case your add-on uses the library as a property, you may need to call your add-on table, for example, .library column add class. With the item class registered, it's now possible to create item instances by calling the library's new method, passing the identifier of the class, which is item in this case, plus any arguments the constructor may require. In our example, our constructor expects no arguments, but let's say it did. You would just pass them here as a second argument, third argument, and so on. Another important recommendation is to use something like a namespace concept to identify your classes. See this example in this add-on called memory. It registers a class with a namespace before the class name, so it reduces the chances of conflicts and also makes it easier to identify the class origin. Now let's talk about class inheritance, as it's also possible to create classes extending other classes with Stormwind Library. I'll also use another example now from the multi-targets add-on. On the left side of the screen, you're seeing this macro class, which is a class created in the library to handle macro management. I won't go into details about this class, that's not the focus of this video. The multi-targets add-on makes a few uses of this class in more than one place, so it makes sense to extend it to add some specific behavior to it instead of replication, distanciation, and setters calls. Note that the macro class from the library is registered with the add class call, but the extension inside the add-on is registered with add child class, which accepts the same argument, but the last one is the parent class name. And after that, the new macro class can override methods and properties from the parent class and also add new ones. We'll see another inheritance usage at the end of this video that will also make more sense of the extension concept and how it can be useful in your add-ons. But before that, I'd like to show another aspect of inheritance, that's the concept of abstract classes. Let's imagine that the macro class from the library becomes an abstract class, which means that it's not possible to create instance of it anymore, and that it may have some methods that must be implemented by the classes that extend it. Abstract methods are methods that don't have a concrete implementation and they expect the child classes to implement them. In this example, the execute method is an abstract method that throws an error when called. This way, the child classes need to override these methods and provide their own implementation depending on how the add-on needs to execute the macro. Now that the macro became an abstract class, we don't want it to be instantiated with the new method, right? So we must replace the add class call with add abstract class. This way, the library would know that this class is abstract and will throw an error if someone tries to create an instance of it. And finally, we implement the execute method on the child class. Alright, now that we covered all the important aspects of classes, instantiation, abstraction, and inheritance, let's see a real example of how they can be used in an add-on. In World of Warcraft, tooltips are handled differently on classic and retail clients. That way, if an add-on needs to append some information to the tooltip, it must check the client version and handle it accordingly. Depending on what the add-on does, that may lead to a lot of duplicated code and a lot of interface checks that become hard to maintain and to implement. In this real scenario, an abstract tooltip class is registered in the library as an abstract class. This class has an abstract method called register tooltip handlers, which is the part that differs between the classic and retail clients. Now what we need to do is to create two child classes, classic tooltip and retail tooltip, right? Yeah, but you may ask, okay, I still need to determine in which client version I am to instantiate the proper child class. But the thing is, Stormwind Library will do that for you. See both implementations and note the difference between them. The add child class is being called with a list of clients where that class can be instantiated. And the last argument wasn't mentioned before in this video, so we could keep it focused on the main class concepts, and when omitted, the class can be instantiated in any client version. So in this example, when library new tooltip is called in World of Warcraft Classic, it will instantiate the classic tooltip class. And in the retail client, it will instantiate the retail tooltip class. And the best part is that the add-on code doesn't need to know which class to instantiate. It just needs to call the library's new method, and the library will handle both inheritance and client version checks during the instantiation process. And the add-on code may focus on the tooltip content logic only. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it helps you to understand how to create class structures in Lua for World of Warcraft add-ons using Stormwind Library. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below and I'll be glad to help you. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.